We'll be looking in Genesis chapter 13 in a few moments. One fellow was getting ready to celebrate his 50th wedding anniversary, and the folks came and talked to him, and they interviewed him, and they said, that's really a milestone. That's a great point to reach, 50 years. He said, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you did that and all. So he said, it takes a lot of faith in God and a lot of faith in one another. And he says, you have to give gifts to one another and to care about each other. And they said, what do you 50 years is coming up. You're thinking about what you're going to give your wife. What'd you give her on your 25th wedding anniversary? He said, I gave her a trip back to Italy. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I don't know if you could ever top that. He said, I don't know. He said, well, what are you going to give her this year? He says, I thought I might go and get her. I guess that's one way to stay together for 50 years. Let's read. So Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. And from the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There, Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we're brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked up, and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt toward Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and he set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had departed from him, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south and east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents, and he went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. You know, our faith doesn't live in a vacuum. It doesn't just grow by itself. Instead, our faith grows through our interactions with other people, through our interactions with the circumstances and situations that we find ourselves in, and our interactions with God. And there is how our faith grows, in those areas. Now, there's things about faith that we realize. One is that faith is something that you'll never retire from. You'll never retire from growing in faith. We don't just one day decide, hey, I've worked enough, I've done enough, my faith is up there enough, I don't need any more added to it. But we don't get to the point where we can just sit on the front porch and rock and say, I'm retired. We can't do like that man who tore down the barns and built new ones so he could stockpile his grain and retire. We can never say, hey, I have enough faith to last me the rest of my life. Listen, faith is really unique. It only takes faith the size of a mustard seed, and I can't go that small. Mustard seed, that small, to be saved. But it is something you'll never have enough of. Never can retire. Never can say, I don't need any more. Never. You never have an abundance of faith. Faith is like the manna. The manna. You go out and you gather enough for today, but tomorrow you have to go out and gather enough for tomorrow. You can't stockpile faith. And you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. It's through the interactions with other people, with your situations, and with God. There's how it grows. We had to be like Abraham and continue to grow our faith. Now, let's look at Abraham as he travels this next leg of his journey of faith, because that's what it is. He's already gone one. He left Ur of the Chaldees. He went to Haran. He went from Haran to Canaan, from Canaan to Egypt. He has gone so far in his faith, but he's got further to go. He's got another leg, and this leg takes him out of Egypt. You see, he had gotten himself into quite a quandary over his sister wife, and God had to step in and rescue him. If not, he would have surely been put to death by Pharaoh. But God stepped in and rescued Abram. Next, Abraham found himself where? Back in Canaan again. Back in Canaan. That's where God had sent him in the first place, wasn't it? And it's here that Abraham found out a real lesson. Abraham found out that wealth doesn't solve our problems. It doesn't solve our problems. In fact, for Abram, it was wealth that became the problem. A problem even for this man of faith. Wealth became a family problem. In fact, it was tearing the family apart. And it wasn't the silver and gold, although they had a lot of that. He had too many livestock. Too many livestock. Too much. Can you imagine getting too much wealth? They did. Too much. And the land wouldn't support them, and the water wasn't there. So Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen start bickering and arguing over who gets to water their flocks first. Who gets to have firsties on the pasture land? Who has to wait for the other one? Or who gets this pasture land and who gets the other pasture land? So they're starting to bicker and they're starting to fight. And it's getting so bad in the family that guess what? It's about to erupt. It's like a cancer erupting into the whole family, and it's about to affect Lot and Abraham. And not only was it starting that family squabble coming along, but there's an implication here. And that implication is, if we start squabbling among ourselves and fighting among ourselves, what are the neighbors going to think? What are the neighbors going to think? Have you ever gotten into an argument and some neighbors overheard you or something? And you start thinking, uh-oh, what are the neighbors going to think of us? It especially happens when you're young and you're first married and things of that nature, when you're getting used to each other. And if it isn't the neighbors that you're wondering about what they think, it's what do mom and dad think about us, those types of things. But what do they think about? Well, see, they weren't there alone. They had neighbors. The Perizzites and the Canaanites were in that land. And I suspect that the reason it even mentions that they're there is because they were the neighbors. So, Abram realizes he's got a problem. What does a man of faith do when he's got a problem? He calls on the Lord. He calls on the Lord. Now listen, it says that he called on the name of the Lord, but the conversation is not recorded. So we don't know for sure if God advised Abraham or not, but right after he went to God and he prayed and he went to that altar, right after that, Abraham came up with a peaceable solution. Separation. Separation. We need to separate. We cannot seem to get along together. Our herdsmen can't get along. We don't have enough of everything to go around. And so the choice, the peaceable choice, was to separate. Now, I don't recommend that in marriages. You got to work it out. But here, in this case, separation seemed to be the very best thing to do. Now, separation meant making a choice. Who gets what? Now, they didn't flip a coin, no coin toss. They didn't cast lots for the land. Instead, Abraham, by the way, I may say one or the other. It's still the same thing as Abraham. Abraham gave Lot his choice of the sites. And this is where that old saying kind of comes in. All that glitters isn't gold. Isn't gold. No sooner did Lot make his choice than we're told a few things. Some important facts. Fact number one. Lot may have been just a little bit on the greedy side. He may have been just a little bit on the selfish side. And what makes us say that or think that? What does it say when it says he looked out there and he saw the plain of Jordan and how lush the greenery was there, and what a wonderful place that would be? And it says what? He took the whole thing. He said, I want it all. He didn't say, Abraham, I'll take this half and you take that half. He says, no, this is what I want. And he took it. Hey, Abraham gave it to him. He took the whole enchilada. Fact number 2, Lot was going to have some really lousy neighbors. You think the Perizzites and the Canaanites were bad. He's going to have some really lousy neighbors. Verse 13 says that these fellows, they weren't just bad, they were wicked. They were not just sinning, they were sinning greatly. They were not just sinning greatly, they were sinning greatly against the Lord. Wow. Did I say lousy neighbors? Those people are just full of evil and hate. Listen, if you haven't seen it in this world or in your life or with other people, you might not believe such things can happen. You wouldn't believe the depths that man can sink into when a simple obsession or addiction gets a hold of them and they can't get out of it. I remember watching the old Tarzan movies, and in some of them they had the quicksand, and you would watch somebody get caught in that quicksand. And if the writer of the script was merciful, they escaped. But if he wasn't merciful, you watched them being sucked down in there, sucked down further and sucked down until they just weren't anymore. That's what happens to people when they get a little bit or a whole lot of obsessed, when they fall into addictions. Down, down, down. Listen, Lot chose what glittered. He chose what attracted him. He chose what looked good. He probably thought he had it made. He had the pick of the litter. He had the cream of the crop. He got the gravy, man. He got the gravy. Boy, this was as good as money in the bank. Like that old commercial, this is as good as it gets. He might have even thought, hey, boy, I pulled one over on poor old Uncle Abraham. He didn't know what was going on. But listen. Lot's ship had not come in. He had not won the lottery. He was not going to live on champagne and caviar. He wasn't even going to live on peaches and cream. What Lot saw was a mirage. It was just a Wild West town on a Hollywood lot. It looks good, but it's not real. Lot had just bought himself a lifetime of misery. He started off tenting near Sodom, and he ended up on the town square, right in the middle of the city. Lot had made a bad choice. It was not a choice of faith. Bad choice. And war broke out, and he became a POW. And dear old Uncle Abraham, the one that he kind of pushed aside and said, hey, Abraham, I'll take the good stuff, you just take what's left. Or at least that's what he thought he was doing. He thought that. He did that. But Abraham was there when he needed him. And Abraham went to rescue him. He went to rescue him. Excuse me. What happens when you rescue somebody who has an obsession or an addiction? What happens? Do you really rescue them? Only for a day or two. And where are they? Right back where they were. Lot got rescued. Then where was he? Right back in Sodom. Right in the middle of town. Good old Abraham had intervened, but it didn't help. And you know, later on, not only did Uncle Abraham intervene, he intervened in his behalf later when those three visitors came. And when they were going to destroy Sodom, and Abraham spoke with God or the angel of God, and he says, listen, you wouldn't destroy that city with all those people in it and all those cattle and all of that in there if there were 50 righteous people in that town, would you? And the Lord said, no, for 50 people I wouldn't. And Abraham, checking his own faith, testing it out, made step after step. Well, what about 45? No. How about 40? No, I wouldn't destroy it for 40. How about 30? No, I wouldn't destroy it for 30. How about 20? No, we'd save the city for 20. Well, how about 10? No. God is faithful. And Abraham was growing in faith. And he really wasn't asking so much for all of the people of Sodom. He was concerned about his nephew. And God destroyed Sodom. But when those angels went to Sodom to warn Lot and to encourage him to take his family and go, Lot was reluctant. And on his own, he wouldn't have gone. The angel had to grab a hold of him by the arm. You ever had anybody grab a hold of you and pull and yank you? Now, I've been to the grocery store, and I've seen what some people do. That little old kid come running around, they just reach up and grab it. Come with me, young man. Well, that's about the way that the angel did. Lot, you're a little bit too resistant here. You're coming with us. He took him out. And Lot's wife, of course, and his two daughters. But listen, God rescued Lot by grace, of course, from Sodom. But it cost Lot. It cost him everything he had. It cost him his wife, because his wife turned into a pillar of salt. And not only this, but he was destined to live in a cave the rest of his life. And he even sired his own grandchildren, his own grandsons. Talk about slipping down and going wrong. Lot did. Why? Because he made a wrong choice. How many times have people warned you in your life about making wrong choices? Lot was warned, but he made the choices anyway. Now listen, Lot was not an evil, wicked man. He simply made bad choices. He trusted in the world that he could see. What he saw, he trusted in that. Rather than trusting in the unseen God, he trusted in the world. And here's the point we want to look at today. What are you going to trust in? What you see and what glitters and what looks good? Or are you going to trust in God? Where is your trust? Where's your faith? Is your faith in people and things? Or is it in God? Lot disappears from the pages of the Old Testament. But later in the New Testament, Peter mentions him. He mentions him when he talks about how gracious God is. Listen, here we have Lot. And what has he done? He's basically turned his back. He's gone the way of the world. You think God still loves him? When he was talking about God's grace, Peter said this about the situation. He rescued Lot. God did. He rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the filthy lives of lawless men. For that righteous man, living among them day after day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. God rescued him, but what was he left with? A tormented soul. Tormented. Lot had a failure of faith, but God was still faithful. We may have a failure of faith, but let me tell you, God is still faithful. We may do the wrong things, but who may rescue us? God. God is our rescuer. If we belong to Jesus Christ, God is our rescuer. He has rescued us mainly in Christ Himself. He has rescued us from our own sins. He has rescued us from the sins of the world. When Jesus Christ died on the cross, God was rescuing us. And He rescued Lot back in that Old Testament times. But you know, wasn't really supposed to be talking about Lot and about Lot making wrong choices. We really want to focus a little bit on Abraham and his making the right choice. Abraham taking another step in faith. Abraham growing closer to God, because that's what he did. Now, when Lot packed up and went to Sodom, God spoke to Abraham, and God reassured him. Abraham, it's almost like He put His arm around him and patted him on the shoulder and said, Abraham, you chose well. You chose well. You let Lot have what he wanted, but you chose well. So Abraham, look, quit looking down. Abraham, look up. Look up. Don't look at what you don't have.